Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hey, I'm Jess, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
On today's episode, we're going to tackle a question from our producer, Denise. Denise asked us, am I wasting my therapist's time? Based on our discussion last week about lying in therapy.
hmm Stay tuned, it's going to be a pretty sassy episode. Before we begin, thank you so much to all of our listeners. You guys have consistently been tuning in each week, and it is incredible to see how some of our topics are just really impacting you guys. If you have any questions, please DM us. We are happy to answer them. In fact, many of the episodes in season two are about listener questions, including today's.
So, to start off with, where does this idea of wasting time come from? This comes from clients, this comes from therapists.
This feels pretty prevalent. This is one of those topics. I'm so glad Denise asked this
Hmm.
because this is one of those things I hear time and time again. I've heard it from my own clients. I've heard it from new therapists I'm training in the field. There's this idea that somehow, if we're not making progress, we don't deserve to be here.
Mm. Yeah, I think hear that come up especially with newer therapists, also therapists that have been working for a long time, and that comes up with clients too. All parties involved kind of have this idea of needing to move forward. I often talk with clients, and I think you do as well, Jess, about that it's not normally a linear process in therapy.
Hmm.
It's not something where like each day we make some percent of progress towards a goal.
Yeah.
Um, and that aspect of being a therapist can be challenging and wonderful at the same time. Like I like the open-endedness of it. And on the other hand, it's not the kind of job where at the end of the day you can say like I did all tasks accomplished, everyone's better.
Yeah. Check, 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 check. Killed it. I mean, some days are like that. But to be honest, like a lot of new therapists in the field, especially if you are doing your practicum or internship, you have to make your hours, which means that everyone that you see as a like consult, you're thinking about them as a potential hour that you've made. And
Mhm.
there's crappy competition between students to want to make their hours. I remember as a practicum student, like peering out my window in the creepiest way, just seeing if my client came today. And if they didn't, feeling like a failure as a therapist, as if like client's attendance showed me how good I'm doing rather than actually thinking about what might be going on in the client's life.
Right, right. Yep, I do know. Yeah, that was a really big thing for some folks. There can be a lot of anxiety around that. And, I definitely had some conflicting and difficult feelings like when clients didn't show up. Like that can be really difficult early on, especially as, when you're first starting practicum, you have maybe like 1 to 3 clients right away.
Yep.
Um, so, when one or maybe on the off chance that none of them come, that can really get in your head.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're a person who is or has experienced that, like you are not alone. Like that does get in your head.
Yeah, I bet that's resonating for some new therapists. Anybody that's been in practicum. Here's the other part that new therapists can get hung up on. I think that this aspect of being in practicum, you're making your hours.
Mm,
You're not making any money. So once you get into the field and you start to charge a rate, there's almost this extra pressure now to be worth what you're charging a client.
yeah.
And this can cause a lot of pressure in the therapeutic environment for the client to feel like they're doing enough for you, but also for you to feel like you're doing enough for a client, that you're impressing them, that they're getting their money's worth.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And then, some things that we hear from clients too that become part of this feeling of like, am I wasting time? Some people really expect therapy to be kind of entertaining, right? They want to entertain their therapist. They want to themselves not be bored.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not usually bored as a therapist. It's not that it never happens, but it's always part of the work too.
Mm.
Usually, if I'm feeling bored, like there's something going on,
Yeah.
And that's another one. I know we would talk about grist for the mill all the time,
It's our favorite
but
word or
if
phrase.
you, it's one of our favorites. Um, if you're working with a therapist and you're able to talk together about how you want to entertain them, how you want to have them leaned forward or laughing or see their eyebrow go up to show that they're really thinking about something. There
Mhm.
maybe is something going on there about wanting to entertain people.
Yeah.
This is like so many things that we talk about on this podcast. A great conversation to have with your therapist because there's always something going on under the surface.
I mean, we had that episode on lying, right? And when we were thinking about lying in the therapy room, it's also about could my therapist like me? And
Hmm.
that could be an aspect of not wanting to share some information, not wanting to be disliked by your therapist. This is actually kind of another part of that, like wanting your therapist to not feel bored or also to walk away thinking that you're an incredible client. Um, you might single-handedly be trying to build that relationship, but by unfortunately, like hindering your own kind of sense of safety and honesty in the therapy room.
Mm,
Remember, Ryan, when we were first discussing this as a topic for research? We were in a conference and we were talking about this aspect of like, what would you ask your therapist if you could ask anything? Not
right.
about not about clinical stuff, but about your therapist.
Hmm.
Remember when we got that response that was exactly this question? The person said, "Are you bored of me?"
Are you bored of me? Absolutely. I do remember that. And that it really stuck out to me from the questions that we got. Yeah. And did for you as well, it seems. And there's something in there to consider very much about why do other people need to be entertained? Exactly like you were just saying a minute ago. What does actually everyone being kind of jovial, and excited do to protect me, or what can I use to hide with that? And there are
Mhm.
lots of people who are really gregarious and social, and there's nothing wrong with being those things, and that may be authentic. But those are also sometimes folks that that's where they feel safe.
Mhm.
And as a therapist, in fact, that can sometimes be boring because I want to get past that. I want to get to the stuff that you want to laugh away sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and we're kind of hitting the ball back and forth over the last few weeks with these themes of laughter and lying and wasting time, where there's not any one right clear answer. Like a lot of the time, maybe even most of the time, I am overjoyed to laugh with you.
Mhm.
But then there are these examples where it's like, okay, let's laugh and also reflect.
Yeah.
Why do we need to keep it up here instead of letting the guard fall?
Don't know how to say this perfectly. It's how I intuitively make sense of it. But if someone does have their guard up in therapy with me, I feel like I can't see them. Like I can't quite get them. Like
Hmm.
it's this feeling of I want to know you so badly, but there's a barrier between us. Um,
Mm,
that does not have to be necessarily about laughter or even joy, but it can sometimes be this aspect of before you're safe enough, I might not have a full sense of you. And when you open up and you're vulnerable, it's kind of incredible how my whole body relaxes. It's like, oh,
mm,
here we are. That can create a pressure in and of itself for clients, and I don't want it to, but it is how I usually feel when someone's really real with me. I'm like, here we are. Okay. We got something
mhm.
to work on.
Absolutely. Which, if I can move us towards where this comes up for therapists too, is that can be one of those moments that's hard for us because we always want things to be meaningful. I noticed that for myself just when I was speaking before. It's like, oh, I want to be making these connections and
Mm.
interpretations and
Hmm.
yeah. I had joked earlier that it's like the meme that some of you may have seen floating around where someone says, like, I made my therapist laugh today. I think I'm going to get an A in therapy. Something that's both possible to achieve and normal to desire.
I love that meme.
It's a hilarious one.
It's funny how many people sent me that actually when it came out. They're like, Jess, I was like,
Really.
actually, amen. Um, the counterpoint to that, though, also is that a lot of times when somebody comes into my office, I wonder if you've had this too, they almost like are searching their Rolodex to see what's wrong. They're like, oh, I've had a really good week. Wait, I'm sure there's something going on here. And I'm like, why are we having to pick something negative? It sounds like you've had a good
Right.
week. Why don't you tell me what's been going on? Why do we have to have something be problematic or negative? What do you make of
Mhm.
that? I haven't necessarily been able to fully wrap my head around it.
I think it's this like wanting things to be um meaningful again, right? It's like, well, if I had a good week, like I just had a good week and there's nothing to it. And in
Mm,
fact, maybe there is a lot to it, or therapy can be a space where you celebrate success and progress and doing well. And sometimes that's really important to do because we don't know how to do it, or it's hard and scary for us to do because maybe we're worried that if we do, then the other shoe's going to drop, or, a million different possibilities. Or it's just like that kind of a classic thing of I really notice my failures, but I really gloss over my successes. So
mm,
the bad things take on a bigger part of our mind than the good things, even if they're an equal share.
mm,
Um, and I think there's still parts of that are about that entertainment as well. Entertaining isn't always laughing, like you named before. Sometimes it's like the good story, even though it's not funny and it's bad and it's scary while you're sharing it. It's still like, oh, this is a good story.
yeah, you've given something juicy.
Yeah, yeah, and that can kind of end up being some work that we might do with the stories about ourselves, whether we do
Mhm.
that through a narrative lens or through a psychodynamic lens, where it's like, okay, what is the story that I'm creating about myself if I always tell the quote entertaining bad story about myself?
Hmm. I think one of the things that you're kind of getting to, and maybe we both are, is this codependence that can happen in the
Mm,
therapy room if we haven't worked through this understanding. If a client senses that a new therapist wants to be impressive,
mm,
they might try to make the like, or allow the therapist to be impressive. They might allow the therapist to have these interpretations and have these breakthroughs. There can be this pressure of breakthrough in the room
mhm,
where really both parties are then performing and not just being in relationship, but trying to have everything have some sort of importance.
mm,
And
mhm.
in that sense, like, where's the transference in that? Like, how each are kind of like creating this space of like trying to feed the other or give back to the other.
Right. It's feeding each other's what lay people call ego. It's not the same thing as what we call ego in the psychotherapy world, but that the sense of pride that ego is often conflated for. It feeds into that. Part of that, though, transference wise, I think is that if I make you feel good when you're with me,
Mm,
that means that you're going to want to keep seeing me. I think it's a method of maintaining relationships that might show up after having had some painful attachment experiences. Or just kind of learning in childhood like that this is how I stay in good graces is by making other people feel like they're great.
that's brilliant. And you can see how that happens for both the therapist of
Mhm.
wanting the client to stay and the client for wanting the therapist to like really want them on their roster.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And I don't think anyone is immune to this, right? As we're talking about this, I can think of dozens of examples of in the past working with clients where it's just felt really good because at the end of every session they're like, I liked what you said this week or something. I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm good at my job.
We are not immune to that. You're totally right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We compliment ourselves while we're writing our outlines for these episodes sometimes.
Oh, I literally was like, Ryan, listen to this, listen to this.
Everyone, thrives on encouragement and compliments, so it takes 0 seconds to fall right into that.
Oh, absolutely. I think that what this kind of indicates to me is that I think that there's a problem with the idea of progress.
Mm,
It creates this kind of like linear expectation of growth. And I just have never seen that in my office. And I find it creates this weird pressure point of constantly being impressive for both parties, client and therapist, that you can't just settle into this deep relationship where sometimes progress is not going to be the session theme. There are many sessions where breakthroughs will happen, but there's a lot of sessions where the term unknowing becomes really paramount, where you may not know where something's going to go. Um, in an analogy, the landscape might feel a bit dark, that you're trying to like shine a light on different aspects of something going on, and neither of you quite understand just where it's going to lead to. And that's a very valuable part of therapy.
mm,
Um, Neither has control of the session. They,
mm.
in some ways, you're each kind of fellow sojourners trying to figure it out together.
I love that word, sojourners. It's a great word. I
Thank you.
now Jess will want to do another podcast with me.
Ryan thinks I'm winning podcast.
Something that's normal to want and possible to achieve. Um, And I do, I think a lot of that comes from, we were talking a little bit about decolonizing, because we did get a listener question about that, and we are hoping to address it in an episode soon. But did notice how it touches on in here too, where we have this, it's a very Western conceptualization of progress and achievement, that achievement means more or upward kind of progress. And you can see this very clearly with like capitalism as an example. You want more and more percentage of profit. You want gains on gains on gains. And that's the way that we are, quote, successful kind of in this realm. And this is very much integrated into our medical and health systems. Most of the world, because it's such a kind of globalized approach to health. Um, but this especially, I think, shows up in Western countries. And that puts this pressure on that you were naming there of like each session, we need to be some percent closer to our goal. Um, and something that I say to clients in the first sessions is always, you're not going to feel good after most therapy sessions with me. There are going to be times when you leave and you feel like, great, I'm pumped. I feel like I feel seen and understood and I feel celebrated. That will absolutely happen. And then there will be other times when you come away and you're feeling like everything is awful. This is really hard. I'm exhausted. Um, and how can anything get better? These are all kind of normal parts of ups and downs. I often talk about it as a roller coaster ride, um, where we'll be gradually moving towards a new idea of mental health and wellness.
Mm.
But it's not one step each session. Sometimes there's 10 steps back.
One of the things that therapy can kind of offer that's really counter to life is how often we may not want to repeat the exact same problem again and again and again to our friends or family.
Mhm.
In therapy, this is the space to bring it up again and again and again. And kind of like that roller coaster idea, like we may have these ups and downs. I often think about like we may have an iterative process where we're going around this story and around the story and around the story. And instead of thinking we're getting further, like in terms of like linear progress, we may be actually getting deeper. Even
Mhm.
as we're staying in one story and so to speak, one spot, we may actually really start to understand that this might be something that's grabbing you because of embarrassment or because of loneliness, shame, jealousy, like some really big emotions that we may not want to always grapple and may not be able to only grapple them one time. And it's so not uncommon for a client to think that telling me something again and again is wasting my time, that they're boring me. And the answer I always say is no, you're not. I do not know any situation in my life where I've only been able to process it one and done.
Hmm.
And why would I think the same for a client's story?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there can be an eye roll that can be enlivening and fun or can feel defeating, depending on where someone's at and where this pressure of progress is coming from as well. Where it's like maybe we talked about embarrassment and had some revelations about it 6 months ago. And we're talking about a whole new subject, and then you realize, like, oh, this is about embarrassment too. That's another one of those forms of iteration that Jess is talking about. And it's like, oh, sometimes you can be like, oh, great, it's that again. And I try to make that playful when it feels right for the client to be like, uh-huh, yep, that's our thing, and that's okay. Like that's there's more depth to it. So
Yeah.
that each time you have one of those, it's kind of like peeling back another layer of understanding the self, anticipating how to take care of yourself, anticipating how events will impact you. As we said pretty early on in this podcast and one of the very early episodes, um,
Do you want me to help you?
yeah, if you can help me, help me.
I will help you. Mental health is not about breakthrough. Oh, I love that you knew that.
I got excited and then I lost track of my own point.
Would you like to take it back or do you want me to
No,
continue?
you take it. You knock it out of the park.
Mental health is not about getting solved or fixed. It's about recognizing when we're back into a pattern and then clocking it, recognizing where it's coming from, nodding our head to it, and being like, okay, this is a situation where I might feel embarrassed. But I'm not there anymore. That's an old part of me. What do I want to do today that might be playful and different?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jess.
Killed it.
Killed it. Um, Part also of this kind of Western progress idea can sometimes bring in agendas and ideas of like this is what we should be doing sequentially in sessions.
Hmm.
Um, And I often find that not knowing what's going to happen in a session can be great. And you were mentioning something about that earlier, Jess.
Okay, I'm batting 100 right now. Like I'm at 100%. So this could totally like maybe I'm jinxing myself, but when a client tells me they have nothing to say, inevitably we get somewhere completely new and somewhere kind of exciting. It's like where revelations come because there isn't like an agenda, there isn't a story. And so when a client's like, Jess, I have nothing to say today, I'm like, oh, here we go.
Absolutely. I think it can be this kind of gift of like, to be very melodramatic, a free fall into the subconscious. We're just going to talk about what's floating to the surface,
Mm.
not about like some pressured idea that you think, oh, this is the next problem I have in my series of problems. There's always going to be more problems. Let's get into the subconscious.
Always gonna be more problems.
Always going to be more problems. Listen, everyone, I'm not a positive person. I think you know that by now.
The other thing I hear all the time, which really hurts my heart actually as a
Mm,
therapist, is that a client might say someone else deserves this session more than I do.
yeah.
Damn. Like for me, when I hear that, it's like a pang of pain in between us that someone would think that, first of all, that I don't want them as much as I might want someone more impressive or more like needy or like in need of therapy, but also that they would say that like that they feel lesser than someone who might potentially have something more deserving of my time.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And the times that I've heard this, like sometimes I have to dig a little bit to get to that's what's coming up because it's so often in the past for me has shown up as like, yeah, I think I'm ready to be done. And it comes kind of out of the blue. And in my mind, I'm thinking, no offense, any clients. I've been a client too. No, you're not. And there are some instances where I've said, really? Are you? And I always come back to and or open with it's your choice. This is all up to you. Um, and I'm curious where this is coming from. And then that's
Mm,
sometimes where this will come of like, well, I feel like I'm wasting your time or someone else needs this spot more than I do.
yeah.
Um, My always in my heart, my gut instinct right away is I don't want anyone else to have this spot.
Yeah.
This is your spot.
That reminded me of something, Ryan, that
Mm.
this is actually tied into progress. There
Mm.
was one time where I really congratulated somebody on really coming to some deep revelations. And like we were doing this work, it felt like a really cool breakthrough session. And I had kind of like, unbeknownst to me, made the mistake of saying, wow, like we've really like gone somewhere with this. And I noticed the client didn't book in for regular sessions. Sent an email, just be like, "Hey, thinking about you." And they came back saying that they felt like I was saying that they should be done now.
Mm.
Or they were like, I feel like maybe I don't have enough problems anymore, and you're indicating that. And it was really eye-opening for me to realize that sometimes this language of progress or of like space also might think to a client, you should be done now.
That's a really cool connection. And that kind of it links back to transference and thinking about when that comes up in other parts of your life, what are these walls that we put up and
Mm,
push other people out because we think they're saying somehow secretly, unbeknownst to even them, that they're done with us.
yeah. And for me, I think that like when a client thinks that someone else deserves this, what they're saying as well is that there's a hierarchy here. There's
Mm.
somebody else who needs it more, that there's some traumas that are more deserving of mine or your time than other traumas. And if I only have a little trauma, do I really deserve this space?
Yep. And it's one of my pet peeves, and rail against it every time I have trainings about trauma, every time I'm working with new people. Like, there are no little traumas. Like, there's just trauma,
Yeah.
and it's up to the person who experienced it to say that it's trauma. And in some literature, I know there's this talk of like big T and little t trauma, and
Yeah.
I will tell you right now that that's not the T. I'm not into that. I'm really proud of that.
That was really good.
That was totally unplanned. I'm really proud of
That was amazing.
that. Yeah, so if you want support with whatever you've experienced, then go get the support. You
Yeah.
deserve it as much as anyone else. And I wrote here in our outline that I hate the concept of deserving, and it's true. No one deserves anything. And on the face of it, I think that sounds really negative or pessimistic. But what I really mean by that is the concept of deserving, the way we often use it, is a setup to feel less than or to feel like we have to earn something.
Mm,
When really, like, especially if someone is coming to me and saying, like, all these terrible things have happened to me in my life. What have I done to deserve this? I must be a really terrible person. That's where very quickly to me the whole idea of deserving falls to pieces. Of course, a child didn't do anything to deserve being abused. Like, that's just not a. So even though on the other side of it, where it's like, oh, I've worked really hard, I deserve to treat myself or whatever, I'm like, treat yourself. You don't even have to earn it.
mm,
We don't have to have this setup that means that, like, oh, some other time you won't deserve to take care of yourself, because that's not the case.
yeah.
Things happen and we choose our responses to them.
And for me, it's like, especially as a psychodynamic practitioner, kind of linking into what you're saying, like you can stay as long as you want. Most relational psychodynamic therapists don't have a time frame. It does not have to be a 6 sessions you're out or you get 2 breakthroughs and you're done. It can be a lifelong progress. Sometimes for me, I love that because I get to be with somebody through so many different stages of their life. And Denise had said something, our producer had said something really cool. She was like, not all sessions look the same. And I love that line that like some
Mhm.
sessions are going to be really impactful. Some are going to be navigating what the last week was like or coming up to an understanding. Some sessions you may not know what you're going to bring. And I think that for me, all of that is about the relationship. That just like in any other relationship, come as you are is one of
Mhm.
the most beautiful safety making things that you can have. And if therapy can't be that place, work needs to be done to get it there, that you can come exactly as you are. A good day, a
Hmm.
bad day, a celebration, just kind of like blasé. Anything can come into this space.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, a habit that I'd want to encourage for anyone, therapist or client, is when we have these thoughts or feelings that make us want to push away from something, that before we decide to leave, we lean in a little bit and interrogate it. If we're having this thought of, oh, I'm wasting time, instead of just taking that and saying, like, yep, wasting time, gonna go, lean into it a little bit and think about it, whether it's with your therapist or on your own, or if your therapist, maybe with your supervisor or someone you consult with, lean into it a little bit. You might find that there's a lot more to it.
I like that. That kind of is a really good way of kind of giving a piece of advice at the end of this of like, how do you work with it? I'm thinking for like new therapists, or even honestly, you don't have to be new to have these feelings of like wanting to be impressive or progress. What would it be like for you to realize that you're building something of a relationship, that you're building towards this aspect of resilience, mental wellness, being able to get a relationship so strong that a client can lean on you when they need to? That often, at least in our experiences, I think you'll agree, the most incredible breakthroughs and revelations and interpretations don't come from a therapist. They come from the client. And
Yeah,
being able to be this safety place where a client can play and think about these aspects of interpretation of their past is really a keystone of good therapy.
absolutely. Thank you for listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.